Now I want to turn to Sheri Johnson for her technology segments. Tonight she's going to be covering craft cutters, I believe. But I also want to point out something that Sheri has done that I think is a benefit to an awful lot of people. Sheri has produced a document and posted it on our Facebook group, New Tracks Modeling, about things that you ought to consider if you're going to select a company to print your models like Shapeways, or whatever company you might want to select now that Shapeway is out of business. And I think her document is really going to be beneficial to everybody in the hobby because it gives you, in my mind, guideposts that you ought to consider before just rushing out and saying this is the company that I ought to go to. So Sheri, thank you so much for doing that. I think that's really going to be beneficial to so many modelers. And I really do appreciate you posting it on our Facebook group. Thank you.
You're welcome. It was my pleasure. I know being in the 3D printing business, there are milestones and things that I would look for. And I want to make sure that other folks know what to look for too, to make sure that who they partner up with in the future to get their prints done is delivering what they're promising. So,
great,
and with
thank
that, we'll jump into tonight's topic, which is actually cutting tools. And we're going to get an introduction to cutting tools. And then the next couple of weeks after that, we're going to delve in some aspects. So let me get my screen shared here. Okay, everybody see that? Cutting tools and machines? Yay, hands-on stuff, no more software. One of the reasons we actually started with the CAD software first is one of the things you're going to find is with the new machines and technology, they're all going to need files that were created on the computer in the CAD software that we talked about previously. But first of all, I wanted to jump in with the different types of cutting tools and machines that we're going to discuss. We're going to look at some hand tools, some oldies and goodies, and maybe a couple of new ones that you haven't seen or thought about. Some power tools, actual craft cutters, which the folks in the scrapbook community use a lot, which I bought my first one a few years ago and I love it. We're going to get into CNC machines, just an overview tonight. And next week, we're going to delve in depth with craft cutters and CNC machines. And then at the end of the month, on the 31st, I believe it is, Bob Davidson is going to entertain us with his laser cutter, which I'm looking forward to that. All right, first up, hand tools. Things we probably all have in our workbenches, hobby knives. I use scalpels because dealing with resin prints and stuff, I need something a little sharper than a hobby knife, and scalpels are definitely it. You can tell by the number of urgent care visits and stitches I've had that they are much sharper than hobby knives. Electrician scissors. These are great. These are much better than a regular scissor. They will cut pretty much anything. They will cut leather, paper, wire, you name it. These will cut it. I've had this pair 45, 50, more years than I'm going to tell you, and they're still going strong. Something we probably don't think about in the hobby industry, but toenail clippers. I know, yes, bad me. But toenail clippers are extremely sharp. Most of them come with a curved tip, which makes them ideal for removing sprues and support material without breaking any of your models or things like that, because they are very sharp. Wire cutters, which are a standard, also good for removing sprues and of course cutting wire. And then specialty scissors. These are straight blade, but you might have there's specialty scissors out there in the scrapbooking aisle, which are amazing. They cut zigzags and squiggles and like waves for water, which to me would be kind of cool to cut those little waves and stick them down into a scene to kind of get water ripples. Continuing with a few hand tools, good old wire and rod cutters and angle cutters. If you're doing any type of wood dowel or thin wood strips, these angle cutters are great if you need to replicate the same angle. The wire and rod cutters, I use these for cutting the brass rods when I make the axles for our bus kits. I can set a stop in there so I know that my length is going to be the same, and it's just lever activated, put in the rod, put it down, And unlike using your regular cutting tools, it does not flatten an edge. It actually leaves it round, which is important when you're trying to cut axles. You don't want that flat or beveled edge on the end of your axles. Some more hand tools, paper trimmers, hole punches, wire strippers, you name it. I've got leather punches that I use, different types of hole punches, wire strippers, of course, and this paper trimmer. I'm now on my second one, and I love this. I cannot cut a straight line with a ruler and a sharp blade. I cannot cut a straight line with scissors. Several years ago, I bought one of these paper trimmers so that I could cut some straight lines. And the new version is even better. It actually has a little wire guide so you know exactly where you're making your cuts. Here we're going to see a little demonstration of it. You can set where you want to cut your item, your paper, craft stock, cardstock. I think I can do up to 10 sheets of paper at a time. We do our flags out of fabric. And when I need to cut out all of our little flags, our 50-star and 48-star flags, I use this craft cutter so I can get my clean, straight edges on my fabric. The other cool thing about this is it also has what they call a scoring blade. So if you're doing something and you want it to bend, because again, I can't bend a straight line either, and my bends always turn out crinkly, this has a scoring blade, so you can get in there, do the bend, and have a nice bend in your material. And I highly recommend getting one of these. It's one of my favorite things that's not in the workshop. It's actually here in my desk. Some power tools, good old standards. We've got the metal nibbler, which I warn you, leaves sharp edges, so use leather gloves or hand protection. Your old-fashioned rotary tools, got to keep those Dremels going. Oscillating sander. I use this a lot when I want to sand flat edges. Unlike the Dremel, which is great for knocking things down, if you go too hard, it's going to leave a dip in what you're trying to sand. Where the oscillating sander is flat and it goes back and forth. So you're guaranteed that when you're done sanding, it's going to be a flat surface with no dips in it. And I love these little micro drills. I've got the Aeromax. Wow Stick also makes a comparable. I've got drill bits. I've got other sanding and grinding bits for this thing. It's fantastic. I keep this in my go-to bag. When I go to my sister's, I take this. And an interesting tidbit is the motor that's inside that little micro drill is the same motor that I use in the Invisitrax product, which lets you know that we've got strong motors in that Invisitrax. Had to get the plug in. Craft cutters. These are extremely popular with the scrapbooking folks, miniature dollhouse people, and with people who do quilting, because these can also cut material, which is really cool. Next week, we're going to delve into detail on these craft cutters. I purchased one of these several years ago, and it's one of my favorite tools. CNC machines. What does CNC stand for? Computer numerical control. Fancy term. Basically, it's machines that have blades attached, usually routing bits, other types of grinding bits. And the 6 most common types of CNC machines are milling, lathes. If you're all familiar with doing a lathe where you've got the material in long ways and it spins. Routers, which are pretty much usually for cutting 2D. Plasma cutters, God, I'd love to get one of these, but the spousal unit is like, no. And electric discharge machines, these actually use electronic current to cut through something. It's pretty cool. Again, next week, we're going to go into detail on CNC machines. Now, you say here, Sheri, you said 6. I only count 5. We're going to get to number 6 in a moment. Those photos that I showed you are the very high-end machines, the ones that are $20, $30, $50, $200,000. For us hobbyists, we're going to be looking at more of the consumer-grade machines. And those come in 2 different formats, an open format and an enclosed format. You can get them assembled or you can get them as kits. And again, next week, we're going to go into detail about these types of machines. Now, CNC machine number 6 is actually our laser machines. When you take a look at the industry, they consider laser cutters CNC. The difference is it's a non-contact. Still uses computers to control it, numerical stuff, but it uses a beam of light to cut your material versus an actual grinding bit. For those that want to know, laser actually stands for light amplification by stimulated emission of radiation, a fancy term for a really, really strong light bulb or diode. There are actually 4 types of laser cutters: fiber lasers, CO2 lasers, that goofy one there with all the letters in it that I have no idea how to pronounce, lasers, and the direct diode lasers. Different versions of these have different strengths and can cut different materials. Some can cut metals, some cannot. Some can cut plastics, some cannot. On the 31st, when Bob does this demonstration, we'll have more information about these types of cutters. Again, the pictures here are more towards the industrial versions. When we get down to the consumer level, the desktop version, if you will, most of those are your CO2 or direct diode. They're the ones that aren't going to accidentally cut through a wall if the laser gets misaligned. My next door neighbor works at Delta with lasers, and he has actually informed me that yes, they have cut through their cinder block wall with one of the lasers. So we definitely don't want one of those at home. We have, again, open format and enclosed format. They'll come in kit form. They will come already assembled. And some 3D printers actually have laser modules that you can add to them. Discuss more of that when we get to 3D printers in a future segment. So that is our introduction to hand tools and basic cutters. We're going to go in depth on the 17th, discussing the blade cutters, how they work, and CNC machines and seeing demos of those. And then on the 31st, we're going to get in depth with laser cutters with Bob Davison. And we hope to see you then. Any questions?
Oh, you got lucky tonight. No questions.
Just baffle them, and that's it. That's because everybody's fallen asleep by now, or the storms have gotten to them, because I'm watching rain out the window too. So
Cheryl, I have a question.
yes.
It's Pat.
Hey, Pat.
Which machine for your desktop would you recommend for cutting plastics?
Thin plastic,
Yeah, I'd say,
less than 3 millimeters.
yeah.
One of the craft cutters, I have the Cricut. There's the Silhouette, and then there's the Brother, which we'll get into detail about those next week. But either one of those machines would be great. I have the Cricut. I'm now on my second one because I've burned through my first one. I used it so much. I use it to cut the thin plastic for our building windows, for our bus windows. I've actually really printed brick on the 3D printer, very, very thin, and then actually use the craft cutter to cut that to match the front of my buildings. So those craft cutters are great for cutting thin wood, thin plastic, and that sort of thing. They do not cut metal.
Thanks, Cheryl. And my daughter has one, so I might have to borrow hers.
Yeah, if she's got one, definitely go over and use it and take a look at it and see what it can do. It's, like I said, next week you're going to see a lot about what it can do. It's not just your scrapbooking cutter.
Yeah, I know. Thanks a lot, Cheryl.
You're welcome.
Hey, Sheri, I had a quick little question too.
Yes.
You mentioned hole punches, and I work in N-scale, and I know how difficult it is if I'm making a building, let's say out of cardstock, and I want to cut out each individual window. And normally I have to do so, with an X-Acto blade, and you can't use a ruler necessarily at that scale. It's just, you got to do it, and you do your best to clean up the edges. But I was trying to create some type of hole punch where I could punch out the windows, let's say in some cardboard or cardstock or something that was a square or rectangular shape. Have you ever seen a product like that or at all?
You need to go to Hobby Lobby, go to the scrapbooking aisle, and they have hole punches that will cut hearts and squares and triangles and rectangles. It'll be a matter of whether or not the square will match your window size. If not, then I would recommend one of the craft cutters, because I have cut things down to a whole 1 millimeter round circle with my craft cutter. So I'm sure that would cut a square window for your N-scale buildings. So first, look at Hobby Lobby. Also look at leather punches. A lot of times you can find a leather punch that's square, and that one you'll have to put on and whack it with a hammer. But both of those, like I said, look at Hobby Lobby, see what they've got. Look at Amazon, but I have seen the square hole punches. I have one out in the garage, but I want to say it's a 1/4 inch square. I also have an octagon one because for a long time I was using it to cut out stop signs. So they are out there. You just have to look for them. Worst case, you get a craft cutter and program it to cut them out.
Gotcha. All right. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks so much, Sheri. We'll see you next week.
Right. Thank you.